This is the second segment of our year-end review of ballot access issues from 2015. We have one of our favorite guests, Richard Winger, who is the publisher of Ballot Access News. And not only is he the publisher of Ballot Access News, probably the single most authoritative figure in the United States on issues related to ballot access, a frequent expert as far as testimony in court cases, and again, publisher of this marvelous newsletter, Ballot Access News. For those of you that haven't seen it, we've already run one interview with Richard featuring the litigation aspects of ballot access issues from 2015. And today, there's really not an umbrella like litigation. We're just going to kind of call it other. We're talking about a ballot initiative. We're going to talk about some legislation and a few twists on some existing topics in ballot access. So without further ado, Richard Winger, publisher of Ballot Access News.
Hi, Stephen.
Richard, welcome.
Thank you.
So for the second time today, I'm going to say welcome today. How are you?
Okay, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's always fun when we type 2 interviews in one day because it's kind of awkward. We're saying hello twice, we close twice.
Lose the spontaneity.
Exactly. So in our last show, you did a great job of talking about litigation from 2015. Now we want to get past litigation. And I want to start out with Maine, where they're going to have a ballot initiative in 2016, correct?
Yes, in November 2016, the Maine voters will vote on whether or not to use instant runoff voting in all their federal and state elections, except not president.
Now, we actually had instant runoff balloting here in Aspen, Colorado, and got rid of it almost right away. People didn't like it. So are you in favor of it or not necessarily?
I'm wildly in favor of it.
You are?
know,
okay.
There's been an awful lot of hostility to minor parties and independent candidates ever since the 2000 election, because people on the left just scream and rant and get furious when they think about the 2000 election and they think about Florida, Bush winning it by 537 votes, but Ralph Nader getting tens of thousands of votes. The thing is, if we had had instant runoff voting in Florida for president in 2000, it would have changed the election. And now I'm not making a partisan statement about preference between Bush and Gore, but the reason there's so much hostility to minor party and independent activity is the major parties just can't stand the thought that some minor party or independent candidate is going to hurt their side and cause them to lose the election. So if we had instant runoff voting, all that fear and hostility would go away. And I think that would be the key to getting better ballot access laws in this country, because there really wouldn't be a rational reason to have severe ballot access laws. So I really, really hope the Maine voters vote for it.
So in Maine, one of the reasons, from your newsletter, if I understand correctly, is the last so many years the governors are getting elected with significantly below 50%. Is that correct?
Right, not even 40%. Governor LePage has won 2 elections now with a minority vote, and the consensus in Maine, among Republicans as well as Democrats, is that he wouldn't have won either of those elections, and certainly not the first one if there were instant runoff voting, because there's been a strong independent both times, and people can perceive the people who vote for the independent generally would prefer the Democrat. So instant runoff voting, in the case of these 2 Maine gubernatorial elections, would have caused a different outcome.
Now, for the viewers, educate us a bit on how instant runoff voting works.
Instant runoff voting simply lets the voter provide a little bit more information than in a normal election. In an election with 3 strong candidates, or more than 3, people are torn. They may prefer one of the 3, but they read the polls and they know that person is not likely to win. So even though they really like candidate A, they vote strategically. They vote for candidate B because they just can't stand candidate C. So that's unfortunate, because voting should be sincere. People should be allowed to vote for what they want. So instant runoff voting says you don't just put an X next to one candidate, you put the number 1 next to the name of your favorite candidate, and you put a number 2 next to the name of your second favorite candidate. So then they count all these ballots, and if somebody has a majority, when they just look at the first place votes, fine, then it's over, just like a normal election. But if nobody got a majority of first place votes, then they take the candidate who came in last and they redistribute the ballots of all the people that voted for that person as their first choice. And they redistribute the ballots to those voters' second choice person. It's been used in Australia for 100 years. It's been used in Ireland for an awful long time. It's been used in Cambridge, Massachusetts since the 1930s. It's not a new system, and it's used in quite a few cities in California and also Minnesota.
Well, if you're in favor of it, I'm in favor of it, but it is interesting. I'm going to have to look up. I'll send you some information. Again, we had it in Aspen and then got rid of it. Now, in the case of Maine, this is a ballot initiative, so the voters of Maine will vote yes or no on this next November, correct?
Right.
All right. Did they get to decide if they lost that one, what their second choice would have been for the ballot initiative?
Well, that is theoretically, there are initiatives sometimes that have multiple options too. So yeah, the concept can apply to initiatives.
Interesting. So let's get past Maine and move up to Arkansas, where I guess they're now requiring candidates to be identified in the ballot over a year in advance.
Arkansas legislature this year passed one of the silliest laws I've ever seen in my whole life. A new party has to choose all its nominees for the November 2016 election a whole year before the election. So the Libertarian Party got on the ballot in Arkansas this year, and they were told, well, you have to nominate by convention. That's okay, that makes sense. But you have to have your convention at least a year before the election. Well, minor parties always have problems recruiting candidates. Not everybody really wants to be a minor party candidate for office. It's a sacrifice of time and energy. Furthermore, you feel sort of foolish if you don't really try and make a good showing. So it's a lot of work. So it takes time for minor parties, or really any party, to coax people into running for office. For instance, the Reform Party in Minnesota in 1998, it dawned on them that Jesse Ventura should be their nominee for governor. Well, they had to talk to him for months and months and months to talk him into it. And okay, finally he said he'd do it, and then he won. So he made history. So to tell a party that has to choose all its candidates a whole year before the election is very hurtful. So the Libertarian Party has filed a lawsuit against that law. There's never been a state, and probably not any country either, that had a law that said a party had to choose all its nominees a whole year before the election. So already the state has responded, and they just say, well, we've already certified these names. The Libertarians did hold an early convention and picked some people, just in case. So they sent those names in. So the state says, well, we've already certified their names. Well, so what?
Exactly.
I mean, this election is November 2016, and they can't certify the whole ballot because the Democrats and Republicans don't choose their nominees until March. That was a silly thing the state said. And then all they said was, this law isn't doing the Libertarian Party any harm. So, it'll be up to the Libertarian Party to show concrete instances of people who have come forward in the last few weeks. And we'll see where it goes from there.
I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and again, you're a great historian. Wasn't there a time in our country, more like at the late 1800s, where when you went to vote, you didn't even know who you're voting for, you just voted for the party, and then the party would get elected, and then they would fill in who would serve. So in other words, you would elect the Republicans in Illinois in 1890, and then they would then say who the state representatives were. I'm pretty sure that's how it worked way back when. So
you'll have to dig up something to show me, because I I sort of doubt that's true.
All right, I'm
I
gonna
know
get
what
that
the
for you.
old ballots look like. The ballots used to be printed by the parties and handed out to anyone that wanted one, but they still had the candidates' names printed on there.
All right. You've now thrown down a challenge to me because I've never been right in any conversation I've ever had with you.
No.
So I'm going to try and figure this one out.
Okay.
So in Oklahoma, we had another interesting piece of legislation this year, which kind of went the right way for once in Oklahoma, right?
Yes, of all the legislative ballot access changes in 2015, the Oklahoma bill was the happiest news. Oklahoma lowered the petition. They took 40% off. It was the hardest state to get on the ballot for president in the whole country. And ironically, it's still the hardest state on a percentage basis, but it's easier than it was. It's going to be 25,000 signatures this year. If it hadn't been for the bill passing, it would have been 40,000. Oklahoma's kept more important minor party and independent presidential candidates off its ballots in its life, in its entire history, than any other state. There's just something not quite right in that state's heritage. They're the only state that kept Teddy Roosevelt off the ballot in 1912. In 1932, when Norman Thomas, the socialist, was really strong, that was his best year by far. Oklahoma was one of only 5 states where he couldn't get on. In 1948, when former Vice President Henry Wallace ran for president on the progressive ticket, there was only 3 states where he couldn't get on, and Oklahoma was one of them. So it's been a bad history, and it's still not a very good law, but at least it's better than it was.
Any idea what caused them to make the change? What the politics was?
For 20 years, the Oklahoma newspaper, Oklahoma City's Daily Oklahoman, they're a great paper for this. They've been editorializing about this for decades. They keep pounding on the legislature. And this year, the Tulsa paper helped out, a few other papers helped out. The newspapers are really, really important political actors in this country. When they start editorializing, the legislatures usually listen. And we've had bills to fix this probably in a majority of all the sessions in the last 20 years. We just kept saying it over and over and over again. You have to fix this. So finally it worked.
So last but not least, your favorite topic is, top 2 primary scenarios. And I know, and I say that sarcastically because I know you don't like it. So what's been going on in 2015 in the world of top 2?
Well, it was very sad in California. We have the top 2 system. We've had it since 2011. The minor parties challenged it because the way it works in practice, every statewide race, you end up with 1 Democrat and 1 Republican on the general election ballot, and nobody else, no write-in space. So the minor parties can't campaign in the general election, and voters can't vote for them. So the State Court of Appeals issued a horribly error-filled decision upholding it. They said the purpose of top 2 is to let independent voters vote in major party primaries. This is so sad because for the last 10 years, before we had top 2, independent voters had been voting in the major party primaries. They didn't know that. And then they made another mistake. They said California would be free to just have this general election in June, and that would be it. They didn't know that there's a federal law since 1872 telling the states they must hold congressional elections in November. Here, they didn't even know that. And finally, they said in the decision, besides, the U.S. Supreme Court has already upheld top 2. And that wasn't true either, because in the case they were referring to from Washington State, this footnote 11, where Justice Clarence Thomas, who wrote the decision, said, we are only deciding the freedom of association issue. We are not deciding the ballot access question. So the State Court of Appeals made 3 gargantuan mistakes. We pointed this out to the state Supreme Court, and they wouldn't hear the case. Then we went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they wouldn't hear it. So we have this terribly flawed decision, and that's it. We do have another lawsuit pending on a particular detail of the California top two system. The California top two system, unlike the Washington state top two system, won't let all candidates have a party label on the ballot. If you're a member of a qualified party, they'll print your party on the ballot. But if you're a member of an unqualified party, they won't. So the ACLU of Southern California filed a case on behalf of two registered Socialist Party members saying, we want to run for office and we want you to print party preference socialist on the ballot. So that's not aimed at the top two system. It's just trying to make the top two system a little more equal to all candidates.
Now you're predicting that there's a strong likelihood that the U.S. Senate race in California will actually be between two Democrats then, correct?
That's what the polls show. Our California Attorney General, Kamala Harris, and Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez from Orange County are the two leading candidates in the polls, and they're both Democrats. So I think the Republican Party will be kind of upset if that happens. And there's a U.S. Senate race in November in which there's two liberal Democrats in the ballot, nobody else, and you can't write in. I hope that'll get through to the public that this is not a good system.
You know, Richard, sometimes things have to play out, and I know you're not a fan of top two. Conversely, I know there's a lot of people that are. But I think if this plays out the way you predicted, that will be a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Okay, good to hear that.
And next year, when we're doing our year-end review for 2016, we may have a lot more to talk about then, right?
Yep, we'll know by then.
Well, as always, Richard, you're a great guest, an amazing a repository of wisdom on the ballot access stuff. I'm thinking we need two constitutional amendments in the United States. One constitutional amendment is that everybody has to vote, and the other one is everybody has to sign up for ballot access news.
Okay.
So again, for our viewers, it's ballot-access.org, correct?
Right.
All right, ballot-access.org for the best value in the world of politics. Richard, you're a great guest, and thank you as always.
Thank you.